On June 15, 1972, a small sailing craft named the Lucette was savagely attacked by 3 killer whales. The 6-person crew abandoned ship fleeing into a tiny life raft hundreds of miles from land with almost no food or water. Yet miraculously, they survived. How? Well, it turns out putting something up your behind, just like in this picture, could just save your life. Although that's far from the only bizarre survival tip you'll learn from this incredible story. Before we get to the shipwreck, we need to go back 4 years earlier to a small dairy farm in Meerbrook, England. This unexceptional farm was home to Dougal and Lynn Robertson and their 4 children, 16-year-old Anne, 14-year-old Douglas, and 9-year-old twin boys Neil and Sandy. One lazy Sunday, the whole family was crowded around the radio listening to a report on yachtsman Robin Knox Johnston, who was on a journey to be the first person to sail solo around the world. Neil said, "Daddy's a sailor, why don't we sail around the world too?" This innocent remark got lodged in Dougal's brain. His son was right. Dougal had been in the British Merchant Navy during the Second World War, but he'd retired after marrying Lynn and settled down almost 2 decades ago. Unfortunately, life as a farmer hadn't gone how he'd hoped. They were constantly struggling to make ends meet, and Dougal was worried his children were being stifled by their rural upbringing. Just like that, a bold idea took shape. What if they abandoned the farm and took a family trip across the world? Less than 2 years later, Dougal sold the family farm and used the funds to buy a 50-year-old wooden schooner named the Lucette. It was this 43-foot vessel on which they hit the seas in January 1971. Over the next year, the children steadily got their sea legs and became experienced sailors, going everywhere from Lisbon to Miami to the Bahamas. In February 1972, Anne left the rest of the family after falling in love with a young man in Panama. Little did she know she'd made the best decision of her life. Regardless, 22-year-old hitchhiker Robin Williams soon arrived on the scene to take her place. No, not that Robin Williams. This Williams was a British financial analyst who offered to give the twins some math lessons in exchange for a lift to New Zealand. They continued southwest through the Pacific. Then on June 15th, 2 days out from the Galapagos Islands, everything changed. Sandy and Douglas were steering in the cockpit while the rest of the family drank their morning coffee and carried on with the idle work. Suddenly, there was a deafening crack, like someone snapping a tree trunk in half. Douglas spotted 3 killer whales swimming after the boat. One of them must have crashed into the hull as it was clearly injured. Douglas staggered down to the cabin and found his dad knee-deep in water with more rushing in from a massive hole in the hull. But after trying to plug it with a pillow, Dougal realized that the Lucette was beyond saving. Making the painful decision right there, he called for everyone to abandon ship. Thankfully, earlier in the trip, some fellow sailors had given them an inflatable 8-by-6-foot life raft with a canopy, and Dougal had also brought a 10-foot fiberglass dinghy named the Edna Mare. Wasting no time, Douglas tossed the raft over the edge while his father cut the dinghy loose. Meanwhile, everyone else hurriedly snatched up any supplies they could before jumping on board. The dinghy was almost as waterlogged as the Lucette, so they swam towards the life raft, knowing that at any moment one of the whales could pull them under. But with relief, all 6 made it on board. Douglas, the strongest of them, acted fast and swam back to the dinghy to clear out the water inside it. The twins, meanwhile, immediately started crying into their mother's arms, but not because they were scared, because they'd lost the Lucette. The ship they'd called home for almost 2 years had sunk in less than 2 minutes. This wasn't some random attack, though. In fact, they'd had a similar incident just a few months before. While on their way to the Galapagos Islands, a whale the size of their ship had surfaced and swam right beside them, then rolled over and exposed its belly in what Dougal believed to be a mating ritual. Indeed, because of its size and shape, it seemed whales often mistook the Lucette for one of their own. So when that killer whale fatefully headbutted it, it probably just thought it was bashing its own kind. Unlike the first whale, though, it clearly wasn't as big of a fan. Floating in the raft, the castaways slowly took stock of their situation. In total, they'd managed to save Lynn's sewing basket, which contained some handy string and scissors, and some wooden boxes, biscuits, glucose candy, oranges, lemons, onions, and fishing line. Ah yes, lemons, onions, and biscuits, that classic meal. Fortunately, the raft also had a survival pack with flares, a couple days worth of food and water, and a knife. Not that flares would be any use. Dougal knew they'd sunk hundreds of miles from any shipping route, so nobody would be passing by to see them. That meant staying put was out of the question. Their next best option was for Douglas, the strongest of them, to row 250 miles back to the Galapagos Islands to call for rescue. Now that'd be seriously tough, even if nature was on his side. The problem was it wasn't. It'd mean rowing against the wind and the ocean current. Even if he rowed for 10 straight days without stopping, he'd do little more than row in place. Needless to say, he wasn't willing to go with that plan, so with no other options, they realized there was only one tiny chance of survival. Just like your only path to survival is hitting those like and subscribe buttons. My content is like a life raft in a sea of mediocre YouTubers. Now let's dive back in. After estimating their current coordinates, Dougal proposed that instead of trying to head against the current back to the Galapagos Islands, they instead go up and around them. By heading north, they'd sail through a stretch of ocean known as the Doldrums. This ring across the planet is where the northeast and southeast trade winds meet. As they collide, it pushes both winds up, creating rainstorms. Dangerous, yes, but they needed water to stand any chance of survival. From there, they could collect enough to last them the whole journey while they rode the easterly winds all the way to Central America. This insane plan would mean sailing 1,000 miles of ocean in a tiny vessel with just over a week's worth of food. It sounded impossible, but it was their only choice. Of course, the life raft wouldn't be able to catch any winds on its own. Dougal jury-rigged a mast for the dinghy using 2 rowing oars and hung up the sail. This transformed it into a makeshift tugboat which could catch the wind and, after being attached to the raft, pull it in the right direction. Despite this win, over the next few days things got real tough. Not only did they have to ration their water to just 1 sip an hour, the movement of the raft on the ocean made them all extremely nauseous. The one silver lining was that flying fish would occasionally flip out of the ocean and through the canopy's doorway, supplementing their meager provisions. Absolutely ravenous, they'd gut and descale them, then eat them raw with a squeeze of lemon. They even sucked the bones dry and ate the eyes for their fluids.
Brother, ugh.
Although stomach churning, fish eyes are rich in vitamin C, which helps prevent diseases like scurvy. So in a survival situation, these odd morsels can be the difference between life and death. Even so, as the days dragged by, the family became seriously dehydrated. The raft was equipped with a catchment panel that could collect some rainwater from the roof, but the problem was, it wasn't raining. After a full week like this, they were in terrible discomfort, mouths parched, desperate for any drop of moisture. Then their prayers were finally answered. It rained. As well as the catchment panel, they had a few tins and plastic bags and filled up as much of the delicious water as they could while lying back with their mouths open to the sky. After so long with barely anything, it was heaven. Then more incredible luck. Douglas was gazing out at the ocean when he saw a 6,000-ton cargo vessel heading within 3 miles of them. He excitedly yelled to the others and Dougal scrambled into the dinghy. Hands trembling, he set off a flare. The pink ball of fire soared into the sky, but the ship didn't change course. So he lit a hand flare, waving the thing right above his head. Surely they'd see him and turn around, right? Again, nothing. Dougal used 3 more flares, but the ship never changed course. Afraid to use up their last 3, they were forced to sit and watch helplessly as the ship slipped past their horizon and disappeared. Being so close to rescue and failing was utterly devastating. But from that pain came an oddly comforting realization. If they were going to survive, they'd need to do it on their own. They knew a couple of flying fish and bits of biscuit every few days wouldn't be enough to feed all 6 of them for the long trip ahead. They'd need to find a way of catching their own meals to survive. Later that same day, they'd get their opportunity when they discovered a large sea turtle tangled in the sea anchor line. That's a kind of parachute attached to the boat that stabilizes it in the water. This wasn't the first turtle they'd seen, though. The Robertsons had already failed twice at catching these massive creatures a few days earlier. They'd first tried hitting one on the head with an oar, but it simply swam away. With the second, Douglas had managed to get a grip on a passing turtle, only to discover that sea turtles actually had razor-sharp claws on their fins. As the turtle started clawing at his arm, he'd haphazardly thrown it into the raft. After a short panic, Dougal had to quickly toss it back into the water before it tore the craft to shreds. In other words, if they wanted to catch this third one, they'd need to be smarter. So avoiding its sharp beak, Douglas tied up its fins in a safety line, disentangled it from the anchor line, then Dougal hauled it into the dinghy on its back so its claws were rendered useless. Then, taking his knife out, he struck. The meat was bountiful, and after slicing it into strips, they tied it to the sails to dry out. This would make a kind of turtle jerky, which was safer to eat and lasted longer. That wasn't the only use they found for it, though. Douglas told them he'd read a book where someone drank turtle blood to survive at sea. After taking a tepid sip, his father realized it was true. Unlike fish blood, which is too salty, turtle blood is perfectly safe. But the most shocking revelation was when they removed the turtle's shell and discovered hundreds of eggs. At first, they simply cracked the eggs and devoured the yolks, but when they grew tired of this, they came up with perhaps the most nauseating concoction I've ever heard. Take a dozen turtle eggs, a cup of water, some glucose, and a sprinkle of dried yeast. Mix it all together and you have shipwreck eggnog. Apparently, it was pretty good, but I don't think I'll be giving it a try. At this point, they had more food than ever before, but as the days passed by without any further rain, their water supply began to run dangerously low again. By day 15, the family had become more desperate than ever, but Lynn did have a solution. The only problem was it was absolutely disgusting. Any guesses? No? Okay, I'll tell you. It was enemas. Now, if you don't know, enemas are a way of getting liquid inside someone by pouring it in their rear exit. Yeah. See, they were almost out of drinking water, but there was a gross slurry of rainwater, seawater, and turtle blood puddled in one end of the raft. The idea was that instead of trying to drink this toxic fluid and inevitably throwing it up, by pouring it in the other end, it would absorb directly into the bloodstream and you'd get water you otherwise wouldn't be able to stomach. Was there a risk of infection? Definitely. But at this point, there was no other option. Plus, Lynn was a registered nurse, so she had experience administering them. Clearly, though, they weren't exactly in a hospital, so she had to get creative. Using the rubber tubing from the raft ladder and a polythene bag for a funnel, Lynn scooped up the rancid liquid and started performing enemas on the rest of the family. Dignified it was not. Yet everyone took part, except Robin. As the only person not part of the family, I can understand his hesitation. Amazingly, nobody got ill. Is this the strangest survival tip that's ever worked? Possibly, but there's more to come. That same day, the survivors finally reached the doldrums. Unfortunately, they now faced another major problem. The raft had been steadily falling apart and was now almost unlivable. The seams were worn and water was constantly leaking in no matter how hard they tried to get rid of it. It wasn't long before it reached chest high, making it impossible to sleep anywhere except athwart a raised section of the raft where someone could sit. So they took turns on it, each person getting an hour's sleep before swapping. That was everyone except Lynn, who'd often give up her turn to one of the kids. The seawater wasn't just disrupting their sleep though, it was having horrible effects on their skin. See, all that salt was drawing the moisture from it and making it flare up in rashes and boils. This, alongside constant exposure to the parasites and bacteria in the water, meant even the slightest touch caused intense pain. They knew they'd need to move to the much smaller dinghy, but it was a prospect nobody was excited about. For one, it meant cramming 6 people on a boat built for half that many. The dinghy also had no roof, so switching meant giving up their only protection from the elements. But with the raft degrading more every hour, there was no other choice. On day 17, they salvaged any useful parts from it, like a few flotation pieces and the canopy, and moved into the dinghy. Their new dwelling was cramped beyond belief. To maintain the boat's balance, 5 out of 6 of them needed to lie on the hard floor, with one person sitting in the middle as a lookout. Any movement ran the risk of tipping the entire thing. A major upside, however, was that it was far easier to bail water, and as the days went by, their seawater boils slowly started fading away. But where one skin problem ended, another began. After so long in the water, all their clothes were falling apart. Now they had even less to protect them from the scorching sun and freezing wind. They tied the raft canopy over the stern, which offered some shelter, but most of the boat was still exposed. So they came up with a crafty, if slightly gross, solution. Since catching that first turtle, they'd mastered the process and caught several more, making up most of what they were surviving off of. But they were good for more than just eating. By scooping the turtle fat into jars and leaving it to melt in the sun, it would be separated into solids and oil. This oil could be rubbed onto any remaining boils and sore parts to make them partially impervious to salt water and the elements. Think of it like really foul-smelling sunblock. But hold on, wasn't the whole point of heading to the doldrums so they'd have more drinking water? Well, yeah, and while it did rain more, it went from one extreme to the other. See, this part of the ocean is susceptible to sudden and intense thunderstorms, and it wasn't long before they got caught in the storm to end all storms. Lightning struck the water around them, the waves went wild, and rain pelted down on them as hard as hail. Not only was the dinghy rocking treacherously, it also got so cold that their skin went numb. The twins clung to the canopy desperately as the others scrambled to bail the water. In the center sat Dougal, almost frozen as he gripped the sail with all his might to keep control of the dinghy. Then he did something completely unexpected, called for everyone to start singing. And like a scene from some kind of musical, they did. Amidst all the chaos, everybody started belting old tunes like Cuckoo Waltz, God Save the Queen, and Beethoven's Ninth. Whether the act of singing itself physically warmed them or the uplifting camaraderie of it all kept them going, one thing's for sure, it worked. This sudden sea shanty saw them through an exhausting 12-hour storm. Battered, exhausted, but still miraculously alive, the crew rubbed each other's bodies for warmth. They were over the worst of the weather. As well as turtles, they'd been continuing to live off fish, and by this point Dougal had gotten pretty good at catching them using just a line and fishing hook. However, tossing the unused scraps overboard meant attracting some terrifying attention. Sharks. They'd become such a problem that Dougal once had to jab at an oncoming shark with an improvised spear he'd carved from a piece of wood. But it wouldn't be long before the hunted became the hunter. On day 29, Dougal noticed another shark in the near distance. At first he considered ignoring it. After all, hauling a razor-mouthed monster on board the tiny dinghy didn't sound like the most foolproof plan. But something inside him made him go for it anyway. Dougal knew if it was even a second too slow, the shark would slice through the line and make off with the fish and hook, or worse, attack the boat. So he waited until the split second the shark's jaws touched the bait, then yanked hard on the line. It worked. The hook sunk right into it. But it was far from over. He was now in a drawn-out, painful, and highly dangerous game of tug-of-war. The shark fought hard to rid itself of the hook, and the wire dug deep into Dougal's palms as he slowly pulled the creature towards the surface. Eventually, the behemoth got within reach, and the others grabbed it and hauled it on board. Len swiftly stuck an oar in its mouth, and its jaws clamped shut around it, giving them just enough time to finish the beast off for good. After this, everyone's spirits were raised sky high. With this catch, they now had more food than ever before, plus their water bag held over a gallon of fresh water from the storms. Despite their good fortune, however, they were about to experience their darkest moments yet. 2 days later, as Dougal was pulling in a sea turtle, Robin was assigned the vital responsibility of securing their freshwater bag somewhere safe. But as they hauled the turtle into the dinghy, one of its fins slashed against the bag, flipping it over and dumping all its contents on the dirty floor. Turns out Robin hadn't secured it properly. It was a disaster. Suddenly, the only water they had left was a few pints they'd collected in tins, less than half they'd had before. This loss weighed heavily on morale, especially Robin's. Following this, they suffered through 5 excruciating days without rain, forced to ration their water down to a mere mouthful a day. Everyone started arguing, and the sobering thought that they probably weren't going to make it out alive grew almost unbearably strong. But on the 5th day, rain did eventually come, and it was sweeter than it had ever been. With fresh reserves of water, plus the fact they now had enough food to see them all the way to South America, land finally felt within reach. And then they saw something they'd never expected. The day had gone by without any excitement when, around evening, Dougal's attention was drawn to something on the horizon. Squinting his eyes, he realized it was a ship heading in their direction. A surge of panic shot through the dinghy as Dougal scrambled to get out the flares. Standing up on the thwart, he lit the first. The small ship was slowly coming into view, then again, so were a group of man-eating sharks. Would they get this close only to have it stolen from them once again? Everyone struggled to keep the dinghy steady while Dougal held the flare as high as he could. Once he was unable to bear the heat any longer, he threw it up and into the water. Then he took another, but it was a dud. Just as he was reaching for their last flare, he had the most incredible realization. The ship was changing its course, heading right towards them. Everyone started crying with joy. On July 22nd, after 38 days and over 750 miles stranded at sea, they were finally rescued. The Tokomaru II was a Japanese fishing vessel on its way to Panama when the watchmen saw the flare. After initial fears that they were being lured into a trap by pirates, they were stunned to discover the 6 bedraggled yet overjoyed castaways. They hauled them aboard and were about to abandon the dinghy when Dougal, in a frenzy, begged them not to leave it behind. Maybe he was sentimental about the vessel that had brought them so far, or maybe he just wanted to save all that precious turtle meat. Who's to say? What's truly staggering, though, is how accurate Dougal's navigation had been. They'd been heading straight for the American coast and without any major setbacks would have reached it in 15 days anyway. Still, anything could have happened in that time. The Japanese crew gave them a hearty meal of bread and black coffee, which must have been like a royal banquet, before practically pushing them into the showers. They continued to look after their unexpected guests all the way to Panama City. After some medical examinations, it turns out everyone had lost between 20 and 30 pounds. But other than Sandy having a light case of pneumonia, amazingly, they were all relatively healthy. 10 days later, Robin took a flight back home, and the Robertsons, perhaps surprisingly, hopped on a ship back to England the next day. But the family would never be the same again. Sadly, Len and Dougal never forgave themselves for what they saw as putting their family at such risk, and just a year later got divorced. Afterward, Dougal wrote a best-selling book about their ordeal. Despite the separation, the couple still had a lot of love for each other, and he used the money from the sales to buy Len a new farm. He also bought himself, shock horror, a yacht, which he sailed to the Mediterranean. And just a couple of months after returning to England, Douglas signed up for the Merchant Navy. You'd think they both would have been sick of the ocean by then. The twins, meanwhile, struggled to return to the mundanity of regular school life. While the shipwreck might have ended a marriage, it transformed everyone who survived, giving them a new appreciation for life. Despite their separation, the ever-caring Len reconnected with Dougal after he became terminally ill, nursing him until his passing in 1991. She was buried beside him 7 years later. The rest are still alive today and are regularly interviewed about their life-changing experience even after all this time. Their tiny raft is displayed at the National Maritime Museum in Cornwall, England. So what exactly is the trick to survival? For the Robertsons, it's to never give up, no matter how bad things look. But now I'm curious, how do you think you'd manage stranded out in the ocean? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.